So I would love to begin at your time in uni, if you're okay with that. Discussing back then.
Oh God.
We're going to go the whole way through.
Way back through my life history. That's a bit scary.
I guess your son's only just started, but do you have any opinions on how you think film school or drama, I guess it's more of a drama now, but how it's changed or how your son's experience is different from yours, for the better or for the worse?
Well, God, I think the whole university experience is a hell of a lot different from what it was several decades ago. I won't go into the details. I think there's a lot more scope now in terms of what, the ability that film schools or doing film at university is a whole different ball game from what it was when I was there. So, as I say, when I was at university and I was learning, skills of being in front of the camera, behind the camera, working the vision mixing desks, doing all of those things with old BBC cameras, that was, I feel things have moved on a little bit since then. So, and we didn't have digital phones, so we couldn't just go out and make a film and, prove our vision or, sort of get everybody sort of acting on our behalf, and just holding up a mobile phone and making that film. I mean, clearly things have moved on. Digital has transformed our lives, and that's transformed the opportunity that students have as well at university, I think.
So do you think, is it now necessary to go to film school if you have all these resources at your disposal?
No, I think it is, because I think you still have to learn the disciplines. I mean, not film school specifically. I think you can pick things up, as you go. I mean, not everybody has the opportunity to go and study film at university or indeed go to film school. But, this is just the start of his particular journey. Yeah. He doesn't know what he wants to do. I mean, he likes writing, and it may be that screenwriting is his thing. He also likes music and editing, but he's not sure. But, he might be, the sound designer on a film, or he might be the music. He won't be the composer, but, he might get involved in music in some way. So, but he doesn't know, because he's been part and parcel of the film world for so long because of, me being involved with it. So, he just thinks you can just waltz in and just, be in film.
Be on set.
Be on set, whatever. So, I mean, my advice to him has always been like, if you feel that you've got a craft that you're going to be really good at, then, that's a great way in, because you're always going to be wanted or needed on in film. If you're slightly more jack of all trades, which is where I'm certainly not a cameraman and I'm certainly not a director, but, you've got a different kind of perspective on film.
Yeah.
Whether that's looking at screenplays, whether it's distribution, whether it's exhibition, whether it's sales, there are so many different avenues that people don't know about, particularly in the film business.
Yeah.
If you're outside of the film business, you probably don't realise what's going on inside.
So do you classify yourself as a jack of all trades? Because I would picture you as a jack of all trades.
I do. I wouldn't like to say I'm master of none. That's the only thing.
Yeah. You have to
master of some.
They go hand in hand.
But I think you have to understand the principles behind all of these different skills and understand what goes into making a film. Because if you know what goes into making a film, then you know kind of the passion that's gone behind it, and therefore what you need to do at the other end. I mean, I'm very used to having picked up films at rough cut stage onwards. The film has been made effectively. At that point, as a distributor, you're kind of shaping where it goes, or you're just handed it on a plate and say, right, this is it. And he's like, wow, that's a pile of shit, but somebody's spent years making it, and you've got to find the avenue to the market. Unless you can turn around and say, no, that's not a viable picture, we can't release that. Which used to be the case back in the day, where the studios would take pictures. We'd look at films, particularly that were made in the States, through the avenue coming from the US, and we'd say, that's not going to work over here, and we
you just turn it away.
Back then you could, because actually there's always an expense in releasing every film. So if you're going to make a loss before you've even started, and that you're not going to make the money back, even back then when it was, you know, there was film and there was DVD, or before that there was VHS, you know.
Yeah.
But you used to, you know, you could make your money back then, or then it would ultimately go to, you know, TV, maybe end up on the BBC in 2 or 3 years' time, you know, that sort of thing. But if you couldn't do that, then the studio wasn't interested in losing money either. So.
Yeah.
But things have changed now, so, you know, there's fewer pictures coming through.
I want to ask you a lot of questions about distribution, but I don't want to jump the gun on myself. For when you went from between university and going to United Pictures International, how did you make the choice to take your career in that direction, especially after doing drama at uni?
Well, actually, I wanted to work in the film business when I left university. So I tried very hard at the point where the film business was actually at its lowest ebb, which of course was not the best time to be leaving university, and then finding out that, you know, film was like on the, you know, in the doldrums. I mean, it really was. It was mid-80s, and things were not looking great. So from a production perspective, so I was, you know, I got a couple of jobs as a runner, but it didn't really go anywhere. And at the same time, I was thinking, I've got to earn a living. So I thought laterally that actually, if I got into TV via an advertising agency and I worked in the TV department, that would be a great way to learn about TV production, because that had been my background at university. It was kind of the TV infrastructure. So weirdly, I ended up, you know, in a very competitive environment, getting a job as a trainee, well, a junior account manager at an advertising agency. So I got onto the program of a big, you know, US-based ad agency, but based here. And of course, as part of your traineeship, you get to be in all the different departments. So I went to the media department, I went to the TV department, I was working in the creative department for a while. So you got to try everything. And of course, you know, as an account manager, you needed to know all of those things, because effectively you were working with the client to take the brief, to interpret the brief, and then make sure that everybody in the agency could fulfill it. And actually what I discovered was, yes, I enjoyed being in the TV department, but what I really loved was being an account manager, actually, because I got to deal with everybody. And it was that whole interaction of, right, we talk to the client, we understand what their objectives are, we transform that into a brief. We talk to the creative department who tell us it's shit. And so how can we possibly create something out of that? But then you work, you see what they come up with. And, you know, the creative department will interpret that brief, and you come back and you all agree that this is fantastic, we've got to sell this to the client, and then you've got to pitch it to the client. So actually you're learning a hell of a lot of skills about the creative process, about, you know, and what the production process is going to be and how long it's going to take. And of course, you know, the budgets for making TV commercials were, you know, they're pretty high relative to the cost of making a feature film, and they're certainly even higher now. I mean, ridiculous amounts of money being spent. I mean, you just look at the Christmas ads, obviously they're probably spending more money on one 30-second ad or 60-second ad than most feature films are in the UK that are made on low budgets. They could have made about 5 of them for the price of one, you know, 60-second commercial.
John Lewis ad.
Yeah, and I haven't even looked at the budgets of what that was, but you know,
you can imagine.
And then you've got Asda with Mariah Carey getting paid £9 million for, you know, just showing up and not being very good.
Giving a smile.
But but she's Mariah Carey.
So back when you were communicating between the clients and the creative department, how did you evolve in that process? What's the key takeaway that you think made you improve the most to increase that efficiency?
I think because you have to be very flexible. Every client is different. Every client has a different objective. And in terms of, you know, sometimes it's very straightforward, bog standard brief that, you know, you're expecting the creatives to get excited about. So you have to find something that gives them an angle that they can, you know, you've got to find all the elements that could possibly give them a hook to write something compelling and create something, you know, whether it's creating a poster, or it's an press ad, or it's a TV commercial or a radio commercial. So it was about finding the hooks and
storytelling.
Yeah, really.
In terms of telling a story to the creatives to inspire them to create.
Well, yeah,
something.
you've got to inspire them, and then you've got to inspire the client backwards.
With what they come up with.
Yeah, exactly. Because if they've come up with something that's slightly off the wall, then you have to find the right way to make that feel like a comfortable, acceptable choice for the clients, which generally involved showing them a couple of things that we were not so keen on, and then wham, here's the one that you really need to buy. Also, these are the angles, the avenues we looked at, which kind of probably met their brief more in terms of what they thought they were asking for, but not necessarily what they needed.
So were you ever pitching for work, or at that level were clients sort of being brought to you?
Well, no, at that point, as a junior person, or even having evolved into that role further down the line. So I worked at 3 different agencies, but they kind of had various different iterations in the period that I was there. So, some clients you already have as a given, but I also then started to work on new business, and actually that was the more exciting thing, and that was what got me to UIP, because eventually I started working on the pitch for United International Pictures. So,
and how did you go about that? How did you go about acquiring new clients for the agencies?
Well, there were people who would go out and look for, who's looking for a new. There was an agency, the AAR, that would kind of contact you if they said, right, this client is looking for, looking to review their business, and therefore, if you want to get on the pitch list, you need to fulfill X, Y, and Z or whatever. And then you somehow get onto the pitch list. And then you would have the opportunity to take their brief and understand what they needed. And then you would pitch to them. It would be all bells and whistles. I mean, these were the days when, people were doing incredibly amazing things of, sort of setting up their agency to look like something else and have the client walk into an environment that was, completely over the top.
Yeah.
Things have calmed down a little bit now because ridiculous amounts of money were being spent on trying to win new business at a time when, there were good margins to be made. The industry has compressed. There's so much more transparency now, and obviously, the advertising industry has changed completely. But the pitch, getting onto the pitch list for UIP was actually due to the fact that the Spanish agency of our network already held that business and were doing a really good job. So ultimately we were being considered because they had done such a great job in Spain. So it was just because of that one country that, we were now being considered for the international business, which was fantastic. So, we were going at it great guns.
I can imagine. And so your relationship with UIP, did you ever jump over to actually work with the company themselves? Or was it more in an advisory capacity?
No. That was absolutely the point. I mean, we were pitching for that business for 18 months. I mean, it was the longest pitch in history. As far as we had to do 3 major pitches because they had an incumbent agency. We came on board, we did a great pitch and thought we'd got the business, but then they had to go back to UIP. At that point was owned by, or it was a joint venture between MGM, Paramount and Universal. So obviously all the contingent, the existing partners had to buy into this. And I think at the time it was Paramount who said, oh, but we want our agency to be involved. Why are they not included in this pitch? And then so there was a hiatus, and then they got brought on board, and then we had to have another round of pitching, which we got through. I think at that point, I wasn't leading the pitch when we started, but because it took so long, I was by the end of it.
You became the chosen one.
But of course, what ends up happening, and did 80% of the time, is that the incumbent agency got a chance to pull its socks up over 18 months after the 3rd pitch. And they decided to stick with where they were. So I got the phone call saying, look, we really liked you guys. We thought you were terrific, blah, 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 all the usual suspects, everybody was great, but, we've made the decision to stay with the incumbent agency, at which point you go, oh, crap. That's really disappointing.
After 18 months.
After 18 months. But I thought, hell, I've literally spoken with every person at UIP. I've now got a relationship with these guys. Why don't I send them a letter? Because back then, that's what you did. You actually wrote a letter and you put it in an envelope and stuck a stamp on it and sent it off. Snail mail. So I did send I sent a letter and said, you know, it's been great. I really enjoyed, you know, understanding more of your business. If anything should ever crop up, which would involve me kind of moving over to UIP, I would love to hear about it. And I literally got a letter back 3 weeks later saying, actually, yes, there is an opportunity.
Wow.
And I went, oh, great, fantastic, I'm off.
And what was it for?
That was to be the marketing manager for the UK. So because there were more and more pictures coming through and the existing marketing director needed support. So I was able to get onto the list for, you know, being considered. And yeah, so, and then I got the job.
Without having to struggle for 18 months.
I didn't have another 18 months to kind of do that. No, but it was quite, you know, none of this is rocket science. None of the businesses I've worked in is rocket science. Yeah. It's all about hard work and understanding how the business works. Yeah. So it took me a few months to kind of understand how, you know, from the outside, learning what I'd learned from being, you know, from the advertising side, what we were looking for and creative ideas about how to release some of the films and obviously the business models that we had. You know, you're looking at it from a different perspective as an ad agency. But from within the business, you're suddenly aware of all the decisions that are made about how what films are taken, how much money is going to be made from them, and therefore how much money can you spend on marketing them, and obviously who's the audience. I mean, everything starts with that.
Absolutely.
So
as marketing manager at that company, how much of your day-to-day job was sort of financial calculations based on how much can we spend? Or was it more
no, that wasn't my job. My job was to find out how much money I had to spend. So we were the only department that actually got to spend any money. Nice. So the sales department, the bookers basically would work out that, you know, would do those calculations based on previous knowledge of other comparative films.
Which is kind of a lick your finger, put it in the air.
A little bit, yes. I mean, but back then it was all done on, you know, big paper ledgers, and how you booked. That was how things were booked. I mean, it sounds like there were never a computer. We did have computers. We had to share printers. You had to press a button, say, "Can I print from that machine?" Anyway, whatever. I mean, obviously printers are shared now anyway, but back then it was a pain. You know, but actually, you know, it was done by people who had been in the industry a long time and were, you know, they knew their stuff. They knew what films were going to work. They knew which films would be taken by exhibition. I mean, and that was, at the end of the day, you know, the main aim was to get these films out there and make money theatrically, which is, you know, it was a tough ask then, but it was not as tough as it is now. That was basically their job. My job was then to justify how much we would need as marketing budget.
And how did you come up with those numbers?
Well, it is a combination of, you know, clearly you can't spend more than you think you're going to make. And, you know, and the managing director was basically the arbiter of, you know, right, you're going to spend this, you know, this is how much you've got. And then you'd sort of say, oh, you know, another 10 grand and I can do X or Y. Or you'd cut back and say, well, that's probably more than we need. Well, we never said that. We never said that.
What strategies at the time do you think gave you the most bang for the buck, and how's that changed compared to 2019?
Well, there are so many more opportunities now in terms of the, you know, the digital spaces that are available. But back then, you were much more constrained about how you spent the money on the bigger budget pictures. I mean, you know, the standard was always, you know, can you afford 96 sheet posters or 48 sheet posters or 6 sheet, you know, bus shelters? They were the new thing, but very expensive collateral to buy into. And of course you had to give several months notice of like, right, we want to get this campaign running, especially if you had a Christmas campaign. You had to kind of book those poster sites really early because you had to print them, physically print them. And, you know, but the impact of a 96-sheet poster campaign is immeasurable. I mean, if you look back on, you know, some of the big movies of the time, and you know, you would notice those if you were out and about in a car. Absolutely. Or if you were, what have you. And also TV at the time, when there were fewer channels, and this is before Sky was coming in. So, you know, but not a lot of people had Sky, you know, well, mid-90s, I suppose it was, yeah, things were moving on. There were more channels, but ultimately, most people were still watching the 4 or 5 key channels, you know, up to, you know, BBC One. But obviously you couldn't advertise on BBC One or BBC Two, so really you're stuck with ITV
2, 3 left.
and Channel 4. So those were our kind of core channels, and then gradually all their subdivision channels started to come in, and then you moved into the digital space. With, you know, many more channels and a bit more segmentation. And, you know, that's certainly what changed over sort of the space of 10 years, I would say. You know, suddenly there was this explosion of channels and the opportunity to target more precisely. I
think that's really interesting, the fact that you said, when you said the impact was immeasurable in the sense that it was phenomenally huge, also literally immeasurable. And now it's become so different. You can measure to such a degree of granularity. Yes,
you can. But you know, I remember even at the time, you know, the post, I think it was called Poster Score or something. I can't remember what it's called now. But they were trying very hard to justify how many people walk in front of the poster, how many people are driving in front of the poster, and
it was back of the envelope. Surely.
Well, yes, absolutely. But you had to have some justification. But it was more about impact. It's a bit like going into, you know, a big screen at the Empire or the Odeon or whatever. I keep calling it the Empire, Cineworld. But, you know, the big screen impact, it's the same with a poster impact as well. You know, you notice those. And probably even more so now than you would have done back then, because although there was less street furniture, as it were, in terms of, you know, those advertising opportunities. But, you know, now every space is being used for an advertising opportunity, and you almost don't know where to look. So the bigger the opportunity, the bigger the impact, probably the sense of the bigger the film. So, you know, there is that sort of dynamic that's kind of that kind of pulls between the two things.
Yeah. So I want to discuss your transition to Paramount after UIP.
Yeah.
But on that topic, I do want to get your 2 cents on if every space is starting to be filled out with advertising. I think Bob, I can't remember who it is. So one of the ex-leaders of Disney is now creating a company where content's being released in 50-second segments just because of shorter attention spans. Do you have a 2 cents on whether it's a positive thing that everywhere we look, there's now advertising, there's now content?
You know, it's such an evolving world. I find it frustrating that people don't have the attention span to sit and watch a movie. But, and this is why you can get me started on The Irishman and Netflix, but I understand how content can be consumed. I mean, I'll sit on a bus or on the tube with my phone like everybody else on that same, train, who isn't reading it. If you're not doing a crossword in the newspaper, or you're on your phone. And a lot of people are consuming that content in short spaces of time. They're traveling from A to B, and I get that actually looking at something funny for 50 seconds. It's fine. You want something that's going to entertain you. If you can't, you're looking at YouTube, you're looking at 3-4 minute segments. I mean, my kids have both grown up with YouTube, and my youngest son is constantly watching stuff on YouTube, and it's probably mostly about football stuff, but there's the odd sneezing cat and all of those things. And if people can watch that immeasurably, that's fine, but I don't know what that does to a longer form storytelling opportunity. It makes it harder for those for films, I think, to find their audiences if people are just not engaging in the same way.
Yeah.
But equally, being able to tell a story in 50 seconds is important because if you can do that, you can create something quite amazing. But I mean, I know in China, for instance, they like things 10 minutes on the phone, and that's a really growing opportunity for them. That's 10-minute phone content is perfect.
Yeah.
So and that's very marketable and saleable apparently. So that's what they're going for.
Interesting.
So I don't know. I worry slightly because I just think there's so much content everywhere that people won't be able to focus, and I think that is a problem. But then there is still the opportunity that once you're stuck in, if you're sitting in a dark room with a lot of other people, you have nowhere else to focus except on the screen. And my hope is still that will sustain, despite everything.
I do think there's something to be said for the traditional power of a cinema, the big screen and the community of everyone in a room watching a film.
I definitely think so.
So your move from WIP to Paramount, was that more of an internal move?
UIP, basically, I mean, at one point we were releasing, I think it was in 2004 or something, or 2002, somewhere between 2002 and 2004, we were releasing about 44 movies a year.
Were you working on every single one? Were you?
Yeah, absolutely. So
and what were you organising the marketing for each?
Yeah, I mean, you were planning and getting everything out there for all of those movies, and that was across. At that point, it was just MGM had left the joint venture in 2000, so it was Paramount and Universal. But of course, each of them was producing more content, wanting more product out there. So they were. I suppose the rather ugly phrase was they're killing each other's babies, So and also trying to release so many movies over that period of time. You're not giving any one of them a proper chance. I mean, yes, you can give it the biggest, strongest boost from a marketing perspective, and of course, what was happening more and more was that we were falling into the US model of if it doesn't work over that weekend, you've lost it the following week. And that wasn't really the case before then. You could keep and eke out films. You could start them in one place and then carry on. That almost became a compressed situation. That's not happening anymore. There's just no room for all the films. I mean, we were the biggest distributor at the time. But so the decision was taken that the joint venture should be separated, basically, that they should separate out into two separate companies. Not in every single territory. It didn't make sense in some of the smaller territories to divide them up, just because of the infrastructure and the amount of return. So I think there are still territories that are represented by UIP, but most of the big territories all became split to Universal and Paramount, and as far as we know, it was a coin toss, the UK, or it was a deal breaker. I can't remember which, but so basically our team became Paramount, and Universal had to set up separately.
Were your tactics mostly the same at Paramount? Were you using the same strategies to...
Well, yeah. I mean, what was interesting there was that they had gone through in the US had gone through a complete management change, and there was a new team in place, and they were very much more focused on wanting to get some really good quality product through, which had been slightly lacking on the Paramount side. I think, Universal had all the, the fun, exciting stuff. That's not to say Paramount didn't have anything. They did, of course, but actually we were really quite invigorated by the new management team, which included Brad Gray and various other people. And they were buying a lot of festival products. So films like Babel and Into the Wild. I mean, we had a brilliant year. I think it was in 2007 or 2008, where, you know, we had like 7 or 8 films in the London Film Festival, and they were all, you know, fabulous films, and, you know, that's a really crazy busy period, but they were all films that were worthy of being there, so that was, you know, that was exciting. They weren't necessarily the most lucrative products in terms of box office return, but they were great to work on because they were such brilliant movies, and, you know, it allowed us to be a little bit more creative and interesting in what we were doing. So
do you have a preference for that now that you work more on a consultancy basis? Do you have more of a preference for the films that do have more, for lack of a better word, artistic integrity, or the films that are more enjoyable to work on?
Yeah, I mean, you can have a lot of fun with bigger films. I mean, you know, I'm looking at Fox, who did Deadpool. I mean, that was a big movie, although it wasn't created as a big movie originally. I mean, you know, its origins were slightly, you know, slightly different from that, which actually I think gave it, you know, that edginess anyway. I mean, it's just a fantastic movie. But the fun they had in creating, you know, the content that they did for Deadpool, I would have given my right arm for that. Whereas, you know, there's quite a lot of stuff, you know, when you're, especially if you start working on franchises like, you know, Transformers, there's only so many robot things you can do. You know, I was thinking, do I really want to be working on Transformers 59? I don't know. Don't think so. So, you know, but we had great, I mean, we had absolute ball getting Star Trek off the ground, and then we had the first Marvel film. So I'd like to take some credit for Iron Man and the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Amazing.
So you know, so we did have fun doing some of those big pictures. So it doesn't mean that just because, you know, and I would say they all have artistic integrity, but some have more than others.
So how did you go about marketing the Iron Man film?
Well, I think for me, I mean, my husband got more excited when I came home and said, "Oh, we've got this film called Iron Man. It's on our slate." And I don't know what it is. You know, it was just, it was literally 2 words on a piece of paper, probably 2 years before. And he was going, "Iron Man, oh yeah, that's part of Marvel." And it was like, oh, comics. And I'm going, really? I've heard of Spider-Man and I've heard of Batman,
Superman,
you know,
maybe.
And Superman, but that was it as far as I was concerned. Certainly not read any of the comics, didn't know anything about it. But absolutely loved it when we saw it. And of course, Robert Downey Jr. was a complete revelation. I mean, actually, we worked with him on Wonder Boys a few years before. So, I mean, clearly knew he was a talented actor anyway, but he clearly had his troubles. And this was his big sort of comeback, and that he'd been chosen to you know, to play this role. And I think what we felt about Iron Man was that, you know, ostensibly, you've got a film that appeals to boys. And that's what we thought we were going to be faced with. And then we all watched this film and we all fell in love with Iron Man and Tony Stark, and thinking, wow, there's a real opportunity to appeal to a female audience here that, you know, that all the girls in our office, you know, absolutely loved it, and thought, this is fantastic. Loved this film. You know, even though it's ridiculous and over the top, and you know, all the things, and very boysy in its own way, but we thought, we can sell Robert Downey Jr.
And how did you capitalize on that? What were the practical strategies that you implemented?
Oh my goodness me. Now you've got me started. So many films I've released, I can't remember all of them. But I think mostly with that, it was about getting him here, getting him on, you know, on the Graham Norton equivalents of the Jonathan Ross, I think it was at the time. It was, you know, making sure that we really maximised the PR behind him as well. And also just getting, I think we were able to do some secret screenings. I'm trying to remember whether we did that. We certainly did it on Star Trek, which was another one we had to kind of drag up from its bootstraps. But that was from a different position. But Iron Man was pretty much about selling the character of Tony Stark. So creating strong trailers that really focused on the fun side of it. And that was the other thing, is like, this is actually funny. He's a one man walking,
comedy show.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it really was. He could do the put downs, the one liners, the sarcasm. He appealed to everything that we enjoyed, and yet he was super rich and clearly incredibly talented.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, so that then started the ball rolling. So it took off.
So what kind of strategies have you used at UIP and Paramount that you now implement mostly in your consultancy?
Well, things have changed, of course, with budgets being as high as they are in the studios relative to, independents. I mean, you take the principles of how are you going to reach an audience? That's where you start from. And then you sort of, what are the avenues to that market and what's the way we can make the most impact? The power of PR and word of mouth is incalculable. And I would say that, now you have more opportunity to create strong word of mouth and you're not reliant on the critics in the same way that you would have been. I mean, that was the other thing with something like Iron Man and films back then, is that you were still very much reliant on the major critics buying into these things. And actually they all loved Iron Man. So that was fantastic for us because you've got the endorsement of, I'm pretty sure Peter Bradshaw loved it. But, almost universal acceptance of actually this is a bloody good film and you should all go and see it. Even if you might normally turn up your nose at some kind of superhero movie, this is actually worth your 2 hours of admission. Yeah. And now I think what you've got is, yes, the critics are important, accolades are important, but the power of PR and word of mouth, sort of selling the story behind the film, or selling the concept of the characters who are in the film or the actors. PR is effectively the cheapest way of creating some noise. Now you've got social media, which is even cheaper if the right people are engaged with it. Yeah. So I would say that the tactics have changed, but the principles are the same. You always start from who's your audience, how are you going to reach them, how are you going to compel them to go and see this movie and make it a must-see. And that's very hard to do when you've got a small independent movie that has a budget like a quarter, not even a quarter, probably a tenth or a fifth of what most blockbusters spend.
So if they're, to take that example, if a client were to come to you, an independent film producer or a filmmaker, and they're coming to you with a film that's about 100, 200K.
The production itself.
The budget itself. Let's say drama comedy.
Yeah.
Coming of age. What kind of things would you tell them? What kind of advice or strategies would you provide them with?
Well, that's a really tough one. Are you saying their actual P&A budget is 200,000, or the budget of the film was 200,000?
Budget of the film.
Okay, so it's a low budget film. If they're going to put it out themselves, so do some creative self-distribution, hybrid distribution, then I would say, who's in your film? What's the theme? What's the story behind it? Why was it made? Why was this film made? Why now? And you've got to start by understanding why that film was made, and then and what they hope to achieve from it, and then you can kind of work backwards. So if it's like, we'd really like to get it into, well, you'd have to look at it and see, is this a festival movie for starters? So is actually the best way of getting some noise and to the film, is this going to go into festivals? Now, if it's a bit more commercially comedic, perhaps not. But if it's edgy, dark, if it's a Tony Erdmann type of, comedy, then that's a festival opportunity. So, and festivals can provide a sort of a leg up to, getting awareness out there, and that allows you to kind of promote around the festival itself. Or if you haven't got, because if you're looking for a distributor at that point still, you're kind of, you're just trying to create some noise around using the festival to generate some excitement around your film. Now, everybody has the same tactic, but if you also have a film that you think is going to generate good word of mouth, then you try and screen it to, you might do a special screening to, potential influencers. So whether they're social media influencers or they're friends of the director, the actors, whatever, you get them in a room and have them talking about it, and then you provide them with a trailer and you say, right, we need to push this out there now, and what we're going to do is maybe do 2 or 3 screenings. We'll book them into a couple of cinemas, and we need to fill those screens, and then you sort of build it. It's very hard though. It's definitely not a one-stop. There's not one strategy fits all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I literally would have to look at every single film and think, right, okay, what is the best thing we can do with this?
How would you go about, say you do organise 2 or 3 screenings for said film?
Yeah.
How would you go about filling those seats?
Well, that's the point. At that point, then you need to make sure that, either it's the friends, the family, everybody is engaged in creating some noise around those screenings. As I say, it's very hard to define exactly how you would do that, because that if it's 2 or 3 screenings and you're just trying to create an opportunity to create some word of mouth, then you want to fill that with friendly faces, and get them all talking about it. Say, oh, you've got to go out and buy this film. So maybe ultimately that film is going to be made available on iTunes, or it's probably not going to be on DVD, but maybe you're going to go straight to an iTunes or an Amazon release of the film, so it can be downloaded. So you then want to make sure that everybody can direct their enthusiasm to, oh, you've got to go and watch this film. Probably not going to be on cinemas anymore, but you can buy it now. Press here, because literally we are such an instantaneous society now that unless you can do it straight away, you're not going to do it. You're going to say, oh yeah, I'll think about it.
And then you
how often do you go into a shop and think, I'll think about it, and you walk out and you just think, I don't want it now.
No, absolutely.
I've moved on. Or I might make a note of a book that I'm going to read, and then I forget about it for at least 6 months or a year. And I found that. Oh yes, I was going to read that book, but I never got around to it. So, it has to be instant. So you need to make sure that all your strategy is lined up right from the beginning. That you don't sort of, throw all your eggs into the early basket and then have nothing left for later. So you need to make sure that you can create a holistic strategy that allows you to go from A to B and achieve an effect. Whether that effect is, I want people to download my movie, or I want people to go to the screenings of the film, and maybe they're lucky enough and we've got a distributor for them, and and they're going to put a little bit of money behind it, and they're going to pay for some advertising. It's probably digital advertising, but at least they're promoted posts on, on Instagram or on Facebook or wherever, and they're reaching an audience that says, the right audience for this film, and that's great. So, but ultimately you're still telling people, we need to kind of generate the buzz around these screenings happening now, or it may be a one-night event with a satellite out to lots of screens, which I've done a couple of those as well, where you are literally focusing on, for one night only, there's going to be this fantastic documentary in screens, and there's going to be a live Q&A afterwards, but it's generated from probably a London screening, or in fact, when we did the Hippopotamus a couple of years ago, we were in the Hay Book Festival, so we had Stephen Fry doing a Q&A on stage at the Hay Book Festival, which was satellited out to about 100 sites around the country.
Incredible. So sites where people would congregate, not people's individual screens.
Yeah, not their individual. No, they were literally cinema sites. Yeah, cinemas. So independent cinemas had booked the film, and then. So basically it was available, and then we could go to DVD, VOD, literally a couple of days later. So, you're focusing on, it's available this one night, go to the cinema, and you take whatever box office you take from that. And then, and then you can go straight into a VOD release.
In terms of setting out, I guess on that point, in terms of where you send it after you do have a theatrical screening, if you do, I know you have some associations with the FDA, the Film Distribution Association.
Yeah.
Do they have resources that are accessible to filmmakers that you would be able to recommend?
Yeah, I mean, the FDA site, which is launchingfilms.com, has a lot of resources on it, which tells people about, it's more a learning resource that tells people about, forthcoming films, how distribution works. There's a lot there that will help anybody who's interested in film distribution. But so there's a calendar of films and dates, which is accessible to anybody who goes onto that site. You can see when films are planned to be released, and that's a useful resource.
Are there any other resources you find yourself consistently recommending to clients?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, the BFI has hundreds of resources as well. They don't always keep them as up to date as I would like. When they're supposed to be doing research on films that they're involved with, I want to see that research up on screen, but they're a bit slow about keeping that up to date. Yeah. The BFI, British Council has lots of information about festivals. Rain Dance, Rain Dance has a lot of resources on their website as well about, especially for low budget filmmakers. That is their kind of mantra, is low to no budget filmmaking, and everything that goes around that, how to get the funding for your no budget film, and how to get things done, and then what happens afterwards. So there are a lot of places where you can go for information, general information, but for Google is a wonderful world. You can find out a lot of stuff. You can find out a lot of shit as well, but you can find out a lot of stuff. You can be overwhelmed by some of the information that you get, but most of it, is helpful. Yeah. So, but yeah. So
there's a couple last questions I want to ask you before you go.
Yeah. Okay.
So we discussed resources. Do you find, on a similar note, are there any books or particular films that you find yourself recommending, whether that be to clients, to aspirational filmmakers, or to people just sort of getting started out in film?
Oh, gosh, where do you start? Save the Cat. It's a good read. If you want to learn about screenwriting and understanding what goes into filmmaking. It's very hard. There are no specific books that I would say. Books are out of date as soon as they're written, more or less.
Yeah.
They can be interesting to read, but they don't necessarily give you the latest info. I think there are lots of blogs online that are probably more up to date.
Are there any you recommend in particular?
Oh, Stephen Follows. Most of his stuff is very interesting.
Very data-led, right?
Very data-led, and actually, I find that quite interesting and quite insightful, because it's quite sobering sometimes to see. Okay, well, genre, the desire for audiences to consume different types of genre is, it's quite prevalent. It's obvious in terms of where you look, and the sort of data that he comes up with sort of emphasizes that or shows that. So, and I think that's what happens with, when filmmakers make films. If I'm involved at the early stage, then I would say, look, make a film that an audience is going to want to see. If you don't want anyone to see it, that's fine, but then you've got to make sure you have to understand why you're making this film. Do you want people to see it? That isn't to say that, we'll just go off and make a horror film because everybody loves, horror films kind of seem to find an audience wherever. Drama is a tough one. And if you're going to make an action movie, it needs to be a bigger budget, because, the expectation of audiences in terms of what they're, is so much higher now. And special effects. But I'm involved in several different movies, drama, animation, live action, sort of an action movie, historical dramas, so, I'm not always I'm not always following my own advice,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to, because at each stage of the process, the one thing I do is a SWOT analysis. And it does, you know, as long as I'm aware of the weaknesses of any project or the strengths, you know, as long as I know that there are strengths there, and there are weaknesses and I recognize what those are, so how do I overcome those, and how do I create opportunities for that film at any stage? So even at script stage, at production, you know, before you go into production, but certainly as far as distribution and marketing is concerned, you need to understand what it is you're trying to sell.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. And I think that's what doesn't happen often. And having come from the back end of the process, knowing the front end of the process, you know, that's given me a lot of, you know, insight into the front end of the process. And I think that's where starting with an audience and knowing who your film is for allows you then to sell it on to everybody else. Because if you're convinced you know what your audience is, you know, who your audience is and who you're making this film for, then everything else follows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying the if you were to give one takeaway, one general principle to a filmmaker, is do a SWOT analysis. Do a SWOT analysis.
Which sounds really, really tragic, but actually can be very insightful, because you suddenly realise, oh, I've got a great female character, or I haven't got a great female character. You know, I've got a great white male focused character, but actually what I really need is you know, a female to complement that character, or maybe that male character could be a female character. You know, should it be? Or, you know, whatever those conversations are. Or we're dealing with, you know, we're setting it in London, but actually would it be better if it was set in Paris? Or, you know, let's not be rigid about things. You know,
I guess being flexible, being willing to open up the story, being willing to change.
Exactly. So I think a SWOT just helps you analyze what you have, and it also helps you as a filmmaker think, okay, so the things that I really need to focus on are X and Y, but if I'm creating a poster now, what do I, you know, and I need to look at comparative films that have, you know, if there are any that sort of are similar to my genre, or the type of film I'm trying to make. Is there anything out there that I can use to kind of inform my decision making over what kind of image or poster I need to create? So there's, you know, those are the sort of things that a SWOT can help you with. Yeah. So
the answer to this might be SWOT analysis.
It might be SWOT analysis. It's not the only answer, but yeah. Okay.
Is there a truth about distribution, or is there something about distribution you believe is true that nobody else agrees with you with? And to give some context and to give you some time to think as well. There's because that wasn't the answer. So the question I answered that was something completely different. I didn't realize you were relating it to distribution.
Right.
So I mean, not exactly. So moving on to distribution specifically.
Yeah.
Is there something about distribution you believe is true, nobody agrees with you on? There's a filmmaker called Naomi McDougall-Jones who does a lot of self-distribution.
Yeah.
She released her first feature film traditionally with a distribution company, and then her second film she completely self-distributed. She booked out cinemas throughout the States, got her team in an RV and drove around the States for 3 months, putting it on herself.
Yeah.
And in the first week of ticket sales, she made more than she did in the previous 5 years with the distribution company on her first feature. So she is a huge advocate for, at least when it's no to low budget filmmaking, you do self-distribution. No one really agrees with her, at least in the traditional world. More people are jumping onto that boat. But are there any other similar principles that you think would be a little unpopular in the film industry that you would champion?
Well, you know what? I don't think anything's particularly unpopular. It's more about needs must.
Does it work?
Does it work? And I mean, and actually it's something that's struck me recently, because actually we talk about self-distribution as if it was a second-class citizen. Actually, it's distribution. It's not just, you know, it's distribution in a different form. It's creative distribution. It doesn't mean that distributors themselves are not doing a good job, but just because you're doing it yourself doesn't mean that you're not doing the same job, and probably better with more passion. It's hard work though. I mean, it's not an easy, you know, I think you then recognize that what a distributor does is take all the pain away from, traditional distribution. But traditional distribution also has massive overheads and a different, there are different costs that you won't see as much back, clearly, because, they need to take their cut. So I would say now the opportunities for alternative and creative distribution are great. Doesn't mean they will necessarily be hugely financially successful, particularly in the UK. It's tough, but that's not to say it can't be done. I mean, I'm working with so many different people now doing different models of self or creative distribution. I'm working with a filmmaker at the moment who has a film that was released here, which was released, we self-released and did very well, did a one-night event. And now there's looking to do the same thing in the States, but on the model of let's do a tour, let's do it, let's build the audience in each area. Let's make sure that all the NGOs are kind of engaged and all the advocates for that, for that event, which was based on the marches of 2003. But it was, it's all about making sure that your audience is there and ready for your film when it's available to them, and then can they buy it online? So that's big. So I think the opportunities are possibly greater in the US. There's a lot more of that going on. There's a lot more of people like myself, consultants and distributors and marketeers who are kind of trying to make this happen. Because there's very much an us and them, particularly in the UK. You've got the studio system, you've got the exhibitors buying into all those studio films. And 90% of the box office is taken by the studio films, and everybody else is scrabbling around at the bottom end, trying to get hundreds of films away, and there are hundreds now. There was something like 900 films released last year, and it used to be the case that there were 4 or 5 films released every week, and that was it. And now there's more like 15. And there's a capacity issue here. So now you get the us and the then, and you get the risk averseness of the studios, and everybody else thinking it's too expensive. Even the independent distributors find it too expensive to release, to take risks on smaller films and to cut through that noise. But as I say, you have got different avenues to your market, but it's about knowing what your returns are going to be.
And I think it's worth reiterating your point that when you have some noise momentum around a film, I think it's really powerful what you said, that you do have to have something to provide a conversion, so an instantaneous way to download or stream that film.
Yes. While
there is still a buzz or momentum around it.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting 3 months and then releasing.
Well, and that's the traditional model, of course, because you kind of have to go back into the market. So if you do release a film traditionally through a major exhibitor, a View or a Cineworld or a Showcase, whatever, then you are obligated to stick within that 17-week window. If you do a one-night event, you don't have to do that because that's the exception. But if you were going to try and get your film into several hundred screens, you would need to have some of those being major exhibitors, which means you're stuck with 17 weeks, which means that all that effort that you've spent, activating your audience to go to the cinema, you have to reactivate them to buy into the VOD 4 months later, which is tough, because that's another ask and it's another big kind of push, and you've got to find more money for it.
Yeah, in a world where everyone is so obsessed with the new, I feel like being told to revert something 4 months ago is going to be the most popular thing. Yeah,
I mean, it works for the studio pictures because, that momentum carries through, and sometimes those films are still they're still playing in the cinemas when they're working out, when they're going to release. Yeah. But even the studios have their fights with exhibition over the windows. So, it's happened before where some of the exhibitors have refused to take what would be a major film out of a point of principle that, if you're going to break the window, we're not going to play it. Even if it's by 1 week, so they could meet their Christmas deadlines or something. Yeah. So they don't care. It's like, no, we need to stick to the windows.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a point. I mean, as a distributor, where it's always like, no, we need to be able to kind of, go when we want to go. Studio pictures don't have so much of an issue. They have slightly larger budgets and they've already worked out how much they're going to need to spend further down the line. But if you are a smaller, independent filmmaker, or you've got a smaller independent, I say smaller, you've got an independent film that needs to find a bigger audience, but doesn't have that budget. I think the exhibitors are unfairly condemning those films to, well, not condemning them, but forcing you to go to through the independent cinema market, which isn't necessarily the wrong place to be, no. But yeah, become slightly self-fulfilling prophecies, because the audiences that go to those cinemas tend to be in their 30s, 40s plus.
Yeah,
you're not, because they're more expensive screens. You get a slightly more exclusive experience, which means that a younger audience who would generally go to a multiplex are not seeing those, are not being exposed to those films, which is where the streamers come in, of course, because they are being exposed to different kinds of product on the streamers. Yeah, and that's a whole different ballgame.
Awesome.
Okay.
Should we call the cut?